Our opening words today come from For the Memory That Heals and Holds by the Reverend Scott Taylor. We light this chalice in honor of the history that holds us and heals us, for the stories of heroism that inspire our own, for the loved ones long gone who helped us see our better selves, for the reminders of those who paved the path before us and blessed us with the advantages we didn't earn on our own. These memories do not live in the past. They carve the contours of our present. They are here today. Look, listen, let them in. May their light guide our way. Good morning. And welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Farmington. Thank you for spending your Sunday morning with us, whether you're enjoying this service in person or watching online. My name is Jessica Sanchez, and my family and I have been members here for about 5 years. This morning, we are very fortunate to have guest speakers Joy Wolf-Enser and Natalie Iglovich with us today. Rita Ben was unable to be here due to illness. I will tell you a little bit more about Joy and Natalie later in the service. They will be available for a Q&A session immediately after the service with an opportunity to purchase signed copies of their book, The Ones Who Remember, Second Generation Voices of the Holocaust. I'd like to extend a special welcome to any visitors today. We invite you to stay for coffee and conversations downstairs in our reception hall. Religious education classes are being held in the RE classrooms during the service. An usher can direct you to those locations if needed. Joys and sorrows will be shared later in the service. You can share at the handheld microphone, which should be that one there. And you can also text your name and the joy or concern to the phone number that is listed on page 2 of your order of service. So please, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to silence your phones. But, we also encourage you to share that you are here on social media. So now if you wouldn't mind joining me in stating our mission, which can be found on the second page of the order of service. We seek answers everywhere, include everyone, and live with compassion. Does anybody have any announcements today?
Okay, I think we're live. Excuse me. Good morning, my name's Karen Duguay. I'm the fundraising chairperson this year, and I would like to make a few announcements about the upcoming auction. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone who has donated so far and who have registered so far. It really helps us with our planning and our projections of what we need. So please, 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 if you haven't registered or donated, now's the time. The deadline is October 22nd for donation. So it's sneaking up on us, not for registering, right? Correct. Okay. I'd like to give you a little sneak peek of what's been donated so far. Backed by popular demand, we have the Kentucky Derby Party, Trivia Night, Butterfly Event, and a Mexican barbecue. Ooh, yummy, yummy. New this year, there's a poker night, a lobster dinner by our resident cook, who is so amazing. No, I shouldn't say cook, chef, Linda Brown. And George. No, Linda Rourke. Oh, Linda is doing it. I thought it was Linda Brown. Oh, the Rourkes are doing it. Lobster dinner, so start saving your money. We also have a harvest dinner. That's from Linda Brown. And a hip-hop dance lesson. What? So with this said, we still need donations. I took a look at how many we have. We're about halfway there as compared to previous years. So if you haven't donated and you're thinking of it, I know I still have one to put in. I've put in, there's a number of businesses that have donated this year that haven't in the past, that'll be on the silent auction, so take a look at that. If your donation is a physical item, that needs to have a picture sent to Linda Brown. That link, that email address is in the e-blast. So your most important thing for connecting to the auction is checking your e-blast. Everything is there, all the information, how to donate. There's a link, very easy, you just follow the prompts. And there's a link there for registering. So we're down to the wire. We have a couple weeks to get these donations in. And I'm looking forward to seeing some really good ones, real creative ones this year. So thank you very much. And if you have questions, see me. You can see Mark Petrie, Linda Brown, George Rourke. I think they're on the fundraising. That's all the fundraising committee that's here today. So with that said, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.
George Rourke speaking for Building and Grounds. We had a great work party yesterday morning, got a lot done. We hauled many, many wheelbarrows full of mulch up from the parking lot to the playground. The operative words there are up to. We also put in a new gutter drainage system on the RE roof. And we cleared the trail and cleaned up the trail for the upcoming Halloween event. So it was a great job. I'd like to recognize the people that helped. They did a wonderful work. Yvonne Wyborny, Dave Petzel, Jim Tedesco, Kyle Stewart, Mike DeMott, Hope Sorensen, Helen Smith, and Brian Golden. Thanks to all of you. She was not on the work. Barb on the work party? She was inside working. I missed it. I apologize.
Good morning. My name's Tom Bjorklund from membership. Three quick things. Chalice circles are starting again in about 10 days, and not this Tuesday, next Tuesday. They're great, kind of small discussion groups. Typically, we have 6, 8, 10 people in them. They're directed by, there's a topic every week. They're super sessions, so try to stop by one of the Chalice circles. There'll be more information again in the e-blast. Second, there is a play. Some of us know Dave Durham, who's a past member from the church. He's still a great friend of ours. He's in a play at the Farmington Players. It's a comedy jukebox for the Algonquin, I think it's called, something like that. And its tagline is, it's about a bunch of old people in a nursing home, and the tagline is sex, drugs, and rocking chairs. And so it's very late notice. It closes next Saturday. I only found out about it this Friday, so we haven't put anything in the email. I'm going. If anybody would like to join me, let me know afterwards. We'll get tickets. Final thing, we have our Raven Crow in downtown Farmington now. Its name is Raphael. Is that right? And Hope and RE put together a lot of work to put that together. Stop by Riley Park in Farmington, downtown Farmington, and take a look at it. Thanks.
Morning, Marie Laurie, Social Justice and Save the World. If you weren't here last week and you would still like to donate to Freedom House for our Caring Sunday, there's a QR code hanging on the bulletin board downstairs. We're working out some glitches in the QR code. It was missing in the magnet in the blast last week, but it is around. Let me know. We're also collecting throughout the month spices for Freedom House, like other people dependent on food banks. They're getting enough food there, but it's not very tasty because nobody donates spices. So throughout the month, there's a basket downstairs that Barb decorated for us. You can see it down there. Simple things like salt and pepper, just regular spices, paprika, that kind of thing. Any kind of spices, put them in the basket, and we'll deliver them at the end of the month. And they are very, very, very appreciated at Freedom House. The second thing is for Save the World. Next Sunday night is our in-person meeting this month. We will be downstairs at 7 o'clock in Adams Hall. Bring friends if you'd like. We're going to have a speaker here from Red Wine and Blue. Red Wine and Blue is an organization that grew out of the last couple of major election cycles. They do really good work in getting people out to vote, and they're going to talk to us about how we can talk to our friends and neighbors and make sure that everyone we know is voting. The next year is obviously crucial, and we can start doing our part now.
I'm Charlotte DiGiorgio. I live in Farmington Hills, and I am having a meet and greet for a man by the name of Alex Meyer, who is running for council. If he wins, he will be the first openly gay person on the council or in office. I'm having the event at my house. I live in Farmington Hills, and I'm in the directory. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for your announcements. And please check the UUCF website or emails for other announcements about upcoming events. Please rise as you're willing and able for our hymn from the Gray Hymnal, number 8, Mother Spirit, Father Spirit. Let Us Learn Peace by Anne Forster. Peace is more than the absence of worry. It is the creation of safe havens for all. It is the building of security for everyone. It is the forgiveness of self as well as one who would harm you. Let us seek contentment. Let us learn peace. Peace is more than the absence of discordance. It is the intent listening to diverse points of view. It is the intentional speaking of all voices, one at a time. It is the tension within the silence that welcomes all thoughts. Let us seek harmony. Let us learn peace. Peace is more than the absence of tension. It is the studying the hard lesson of letting go. It is breathing through pain into tranquility. It is forming friendship out of enmity. Let us seek serenity. Let us learn peace. Peace is much more than the absence of war. It is observing the promised truce when anger would say no. It is finding the just compromise when the ego would say, my way. It is striving for reconciliation when the heart would say, revenge. Let us seek amity for all the earth. Let us learn peace. Natalie Eglovich and Joy Wolf-Enzer, PhD, are contributing authors to the book The Ones Who Remember, Second-Generation Voices of the Holocaust. Natalie was raised in suburban Detroit to loving parents, both Holocaust survivors, led by example in valuing hard work, respect for others, and kindness. Natalie received degrees from the University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan, and Wayne State University. She recently retired as an educator after teaching for 38 years. Natalie lives in Ann Arbor with her husband and 2 adult children. In her spare time, she enjoys doing obedience tracking and protection training with her German Shepherd. Joy grew up in New York City and has lived in Ann Arbor since 1973. Writing and being a co-editor on their book project has deepened her attachment to Krakow, her ancient ancestral home. Joy is a recently retired clinical psychologist, and together with her husband Doug, also a fellow retired psychologist, have 2 daughters and 1 granddaughter. Joy has studied classical piano since the age of 6 and still tackles pieces that are a stretch for her little fingers to play. Please welcome Natalie and Joy.
Good morning. Oh, this is a strong mic. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Jess, for the introduction, and thank you all for inviting us to join you at Sunday service. We're very, very grateful to be here. So I'd like to open by telling you a little bit about the backstory of our book. The 16 authors in our anthology were born to Holocaust survivors from all over Europe, and we ourselves grew up across the world in the US, Canada, Sweden, Switzerland, Hungary, and Israel. Our life paths led us all to Ann Arbor and to Temple Beth Emeth, a Reformed congregation. We came together there 20 years ago as a Generations After group, when our then rabbi invited us to write an original Holocaust remembrance service that would be more personal and immediate than what we found in the existing liturgy. Natalie and I were part of that original core group. We've written new services every year since. We knew from the beginning that we wanted our services to center our survivor parents' stories. We hoped our congregation would move through the impossible to comprehend 6 million into the world of specific families as introduced to them by members of their own temple community. By 2014, we'd amassed enough family stories that we decided to compile them into an anthology, thinking, how hard could that be? We narrowed down a couple hundred narratives into a first draft manuscript and sent it to outside readers in academia and in publishing. One reader said, "These stories are very compelling, but where are you in all this?" Our first reaction was, us? It's not about us. And our second reaction was, we can talk with sorrow about our parents' suffering, and we can talk with pride about their resilience, but it would be self-indulgent and even disloyal to talk about their post-traumatic stress, never mind its effects on us. We hadn't yet fully shared that impact even among ourselves, much less with the outside world. But our reader, along with one of our generations after elders, encouraged us to take the plunge. So we did. And we emerged from that deep dive with a completely rewritten book that's very different than the one we originally set out to write. Ours is a purpose-driven project with several missions, all of which have been validated in reviews, in awards, and in participants' responses to the presentations we've given in the last 18 months. First, we want our book to inspire others about the strength of the human spirit, to see that from trauma can also come fortitude, compassion, and tolerance. Second, part of our second-generation legacy is that we're canaries in the coal mine, highly sensitive to early warning signs of autocracy and neo-fascism. We want our book to sound an alarm about the terrible consequences of being bystanders when there are assaults on human rights and on the institutions of democracy. And finally, as the survivor generation dwindles in numbers and as we ourselves age, we want to honor our parents' legacies by sharing the lessons of the Holocaust from our own second-generation perspective. So now we'd like to share some excerpts from our 2 chapters. And when we're done, we'll return to service and then look forward to chatting more with you during the coffee hour. So I'm going to go first. My chapter is called "One Day the World Will Be the World Again." And that comes from my maternal grandmother, for whom I am named and whom I never knew because she died in the last days of the war. My grandmother kept close to my mother and aunt from the very beginning to the very end. She was very protective, and she was very fierce in making sure they did the right thing, even under terrible circumstances. And she used to say to her daughters, "One day the world will be the world again. You have to remember how to behave." That was my mantra growing up, and it's kind of been my moral compass, North Star, ever since. My parents were from Krakow, Poland. A little more background. They met and married during the war and were together in the Krakow ghetto and the Płaszów slave labor camp before being separated and sent to different camps. They reunited in September 1945, a whole saga of its own that you can read more about in the book. And they spent 2 years in Sweden before gaining entry to the US in 1948. When my older brother John was born in Stockholm in 1946, my mother kept this journal in which she wrote him letters, and those letters included the following promise: "I will tell you about all those you weren't given the opportunity to know and to love, all those who will live through you and those who will follow you, because I will create a legend to secure their immortality." This storytelling ability came naturally to my mother. She and my aunt had written poetry in the camps, and they had prose writing careers in English in this country. My chapter includes a specific focus on my mother's gift for storytelling and how it helped me to make sense of her wartime experiences. So now comes from the chapter. In 1943, in the midst of the horror and degradation of the Skaržisko slave labor camp, my 22-year-old mother wrote a defiant line. My name is number 906, and guess what? I still write verse. Henya Carmel and her sister Ilona had already endured the terror of the Nazi invasion. Their family had fled Krakow for the East, but after their father was captured and deported to his death, they decided they were better off returning to the relative safety and community of the Krakow ghetto. From there, my mother, aunt, and grandmother were enslaved in Płaszów, Skaržisko, and Buchenwald. Along with the other prisoners, they were starved and beaten. They fell ill with typhoid and typhus. They watched as loved ones were taken off to their deaths. Their survival depended on contributing to the German war effort. Working under horrific conditions, they stuffed munitions with poisonous picric acid that infiltrated their lungs and yellowed their skin. And yet, through all of this, Henya and Ilona wrote poetry on sheets of paper smuggled into the barracks from the slave labor factory. In the progressive Jewish academy they'd attended until the outbreak of World War II, the sisters had studied Polish, learning Adam Mickiewicz's classical romantic verses and Julian Tuwim's experimental poetic forms. They loved Poland and her literature, even though, my mother lamented, Poland never loved them back. I was a sickly little girl and a notoriously fussy eater. My mother, frantic for my well-being, used every imaginable tactic to get food into me. She waved forkfuls of food before my mouth and chanted, "Here comes the airplane, open the airport." She provoked me with nicknames like string bean and soup green. She performed dramatic recitations of the cautionary Polish children's tale, Hanna Niejatka, about a little girl so stubbornly skinny that when her mother treated her to a balloon from the vendor in the park, it lofted her high into a tree, leaving her stuck and frightened until the firemen came to rescue her. Side note, I thought that was kind of romantic, so it didn't work. Over seemingly endless bowls of green pea soup and plates of brisket, potato, and spinach, my mother cajoled me to eat. If you finish your soup down to the bottom, I will tell you the story of how my Aunt Dora became a pediatrician. Eat your vegetables, and I will tell you the story of how I played in the park with my grandmother in Warsaw. Those stories whetted my appetite. They followed a fairy tale arc, an idyllic childhood, a time of suffering under a fearsome ogre, and finally the happy ending in which the ogre is vanquished and the heroes survive. My parents were the center of my universe, and the stories told by the heroine herself suffused me with a sense of nourishment and protection even greater than my mother's best culinary offerings. So starting when I was in junior high school, my mother took up creative writing in English and wrote numerous short stories before she started her first novel. My father had always been my mother's greatest literary champion and personal assistant, driving her to and from creative writing class and typing her manuscripts for her. By the time my mother started working on her novel, I was in high school and had mastered typing. Beyond my regular chores, my most important household contribution was to be my mother's secretary. The summer I turned 16, I wanted to attend summer camp, but my mother was at a critical point in developing her manuscript. She offered me the princely sum of $500 to stay home and work for her. Our compromise was that I took the typewriter to camp along with my mother's latest notebooks. During the other campers' free time, I sat on my bunk bed and typed. My parents drove up every week or two to deliver new notebooks. I never experienced this as a burden, but rather as a front row seat to my mother's creative process. I loved her characters, especially the heroine Halina, based on my mother during early wartime, who was an adolescent like me. In real life, I argued with my mother over her refusal to let me wear makeup, But while I typed, I was mollified by her description of Helena's eyelids, which she said had come to her when she looked in on me as I slept, so delicately shadowed with lacy veins that they needed no cosmetic enhancement. So my mother and aunt eventually published 2 novels apiece. My brother is a prolific writer. My 2 daughters are published academic and creative writers. They both teach English, one at the University of Wisconsin and the other at U of M. And for a long time, I thought that the writing gene had passed over me, but my legacy caught up with me through this book project, and now I'm able to say I, too, am a writer. Thank you. I'd like to bring up Natalie.
Good morning. I feel very honored to be here. I just want to let you know. Both my parents were Polish Jews. My father grew up in a small town called Ostrolenka. It's like a fiddler on the roof shtetl at the time. And he was orphaned young and raised by his 2 older sisters. When the Germans occupied his village, he was 19 years old and had just begun his first year of study to be a rabbi. He and his sisters ran away to Russia, where his older brother was at the time, and they survived the war in Siberia. My mother came from the second largest town in Poland called Łódź. It was a textile town. Her father died when she was young, and there were 5 children, and her mother kept them alive and was able to open this small clothes washing business, which was really unusual at the time for women to do. But she was a very independent woman and in need of a job to feed her 5 children. They were taken to the Łódź ghetto in 1939, and in 1944, in the fall of 1944, around this time, they were taken on trains to Auschwitz. My mother was in Auschwitz in a subcamp of Ravensbrück, which was an all-women's camp, and then she was liberated in Bergen-Belsen April 15th, 1945, with 2 of her sisters, and her younger brother survived too. She lost her mother, her aunts, and one of her sisters. So I grew up in Oak Park. My father immigrated to the United States in 1948 with his 2 sisters and 2 nephews, and my mother and her surviving sisters moved to Israel after the war, and then my mother was here visiting family and met my father, and the rest is history. I grew up in Oak Park, just down the road. All right, I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from my chapter. It's called Lessons from My Parents. The first excerpt really kind of talks about my kind of awakening to, my family is different. When I was 7 years old, I took to climbing a huge oak tree that grew in the front yard. Knowing that my father would forbid this activity, I waited until he took his afternoon nap before heaving myself up the large branch. Every day in the spring and summer, I tried to climb a little bit higher. I got as far as the rooftop of our house, which probably wasn't very far because I lived in a very small house. It was 1 story. Still, I felt on top of the world and loved looking out from my perch at the street and houses below, observing the comings and goings without being noticed. One day, while I enjoyed my hideout, an elderly Jewish neighbor, Mrs. Marks, came walking down the sidewalk towards me. She stood underneath that oak tree, wagging her finger at me, and said, "You get down from that tree right now. Don't you know nothing else can happen to you?" I scrambled down from that tree and never climbed it again. I was beginning to understand that something terrible had happened to my parents' life, and nothing else terrible could befall them. They couldn't lose me. In my predominantly Jewish neighborhood, my neighbors felt the need to protect my parents from more loss. From an early age, I understood that being loved by your parents was natural, but the idea that I was so cherished and precious that neighbors would intervene in my tree climbing exploits did not seem normal. When I went to my friend's house, I saw that their parents were devoted to their children, yet they still retained an element of themselves. They seemed to have their own dreams and desires. In my house, my father told me often that I was his life. My mother would say she was living for me. This heavy love felt like a burden, and since at times I was troublesome and disobedient, I felt very undeserving. Why did they act this way? What had happened to them? Around the age of 7, I began to get a very vague notion. Unbeknownst to my parents, I understood their secret language, Yiddish. When they spoke that secret language among their close-knit circles of survivor family members and survivor friends, the conversation began with these phrases: before the war, during the war, or after the war. So there had been some kind of war, I thought. Throughout my early childhood, I was periodically awakened in the middle of the night by my mother's piercing screams, "No, no, no!" And then her face would suddenly appear over me. I would ask her in the morning what happened, and she would say, "Nothing, a bad dream." So this happened periodically, and she always said the same thing. Eventually, she would tell me, "I dreamt you and I were behind a barbed wire fence," she would begin, "and the Nazis were coming for you." One morning, I asked her why she kept having this sort of dream. And without hesitation, my mother was not known for having a filter of any kind, she told me. She said, "In the ghetto, a woman who lived directly above her on the 3rd floor had a beautiful baby boy. He must have been about 6 months old when the Nazis came for him. Knowing what the Nazis did to babies, she threw him out the window. She wanted him to die from her hand and not the Nazis." "You saw this happen, Mom?" I asked. She said, I saw that happen. Somehow I could see it too, and it was terrifying. I went into my room and cried. By the time I was 10 years old, my mother no longer screamed in the middle of the night. That was 1968, 23 years after her liberation from Bergen-Belsen. I want to tell you a little bit about my father. My father grew up in a very observant home in Ostrolenka, a small fiddler-on-the-roof type village, about 75 miles northeast of Warsaw, Poland. He was the youngest child of 4. By the time he was 10 years old, his grandmother and father had passed away. An orphan now, he was cared for by his older sisters, Sarah and Zelda. After completing the equivalent of high school in Ostrolenka, he continued his studies in a yeshiva in a neighboring town. He frequently told me this story about the generosity he experienced in the Jewish community he was a part of. He said Jewish families and villages took turns hosting the yeshiva boys. Most families were very poor, but felt it was an honor to take care of us as we pursued our Jewish studies. When I came to eat the main meal at midday at one of the host families, I realized that I was receiving more and better food than their children. This made me feel terrible, he said. The next day, I decided to stay and study during our meal break so the family wouldn't have to share their food with me. Wouldn't you know it? About 45 minutes into the meal break, the mother of the household came to the yeshiva looking for me. She asked me why I hadn't come and gave me the meal she had prepared. It was her mitzvah, she said, her good deed. She asked me not to take that from her. I understood then, and I never skipped a meal again. My father embodied this lesson of generosity and kindness throughout his life. When I was a teen and my mother no longer worked at the Jewish bakery, I went with my father one day on Friday before Shabbat to get a challah. As we waited in line, a woman in front of us was parsing out her coins to pay for 2 loaves of bread. My father turned to her and said in Yiddish, "Would you give me the mitzvah, the good deed of paying for your bread?" Of course, she had to say yes. She had to. I realized she was doing my father a favor. I'm going to end with this story of my mother experience in the subcamp in Ravensbrück. One day when I was about 10, while searching for the needles, I should tell you this before, my mother was an avid knitter. She was an expert. She learned when she was a child, and she knit throughout her life and worked in knit shops. So that brings you up to date of how I'm starting this story. When I was 10, While searching for the needle she won from her needle case, my mother showed me an unusual pair of knitting needles. And she told me the story of these knitting needles, which had the origin in one of the smaller concentration camps she'd been sent in Germany. It was a good camp, my mother would said. The head of the camp was an old World War I German officer who wasn't cruel. Still, the Jewish prisoners, all of us girls, were starved and poorly dressed for the upcoming winter. My sisters and I worked in the ammunition factory nearby. Mala, who was her younger sister, and I worked the day shift, and Lola, who was her older sister, worked the night shift. Wounded soldiers and local village women worked at the factory as well. The soldiers and villagers were forbidden to talk with us, having been told that we were criminals. One day, a middle-aged German woman who was working with me came up and said, "Pretend I'm fixing your machine." I nodded. Then the woman whispered, "They told us you were criminals. You're so young. What were your crimes?" "Our crimes were Jewish," my mother said. "Sin Juden!" the woman exclaimed, shocked. "What can I do for you? How can I help?" she asked. "It's cold and we have no stockings. If I had knitting needles, I could pull the threads from the blanket to knit my sisters and myself stockings." The next day, I found a pair of knitting needles in my workstation. They weren't real knitting needles. They were bicycle spokes with corks on the end. I hid them under my clothes and I brought them back to my barrack, where I knit stockings for my sister and myself. This woman risked her life for me, and every day when I arrived at the factory, she would smile at me. That smile meant so much. It was a smile of a mother, and I missed my mother so much. Through several more concentration camps and the chaos of liberation, my mother managed to keep those knitting needles with her until she died 2012 at 91. After her death, I searched for those makeshift knitting needles in her many needle cases, and I finally found them among the beautiful sets of real knitting needles my mother used. I never thought to ask her why she kept those needles. I hope they reminded her that in the most terrible times of the smile and a gift of one nameless person, of how one nameless person can give hope and warmth to another. That's what the story taught me. I brought these needles with me. I plan to give them to the Holocaust Museum in D.C., so I won't be able to share them for long, but I'll come down and show them to you.
So there are, what I've learned since is there are stories of things like this, but there are very few that exist. And so that's why I feel it's really important that I pass them on to the museum.
So we look forward to you talking and answering questions after. And again, thank you for allowing us to be here.
Thank you both for sharing. It was amazing to hear those stories, and I'm looking forward to reading the book and learning more. A perfect heart is one that has known love and loss, joy and sorrow. The perfect heart is one that has been shared. As joys and sorrows of our community are shared, please direct your energy, prayers, and meditations as a gift of compassion and strength. You can also raise your hand and I will bring you the handheld mic if you need it. sanctuary of our hearts, one for the joys, one for the sorrows, and one for the strength of our gathered community that can support and bring you peace. For the gifts that we have received and the gifts which we ourselves are, may we be truly grateful. May we be committed to using these gifts to make a difference in the world, to increase love and justice, to decrease hatred and oppression, to expand beloved community, to share and to keep sharing as long as ever we can.
Go out into the highways and byways.
Please rise as you are willing and able for our hymn from the Teal hymnal, number 1068, Rising Green. Our closing words are adapted from words by Mark Bellatini. Live simply, gently, at home in yourselves. Act justly, speak justly. Remember the depth of your own compassion. Forget not your power in the days of your powerlessness. Do not desire to be wealthier than your peers, and stint not your hand of charity. Practice forbearance. Speak the truth, or speak not. Take care of yourselves as bodies, for you are a good gift. Crave peace for all people in the world, beginning with yourselves, and go as you go with the dream of that peace alive in your heart. So we invite